Hi, I'm Brad Allen, and we're going to talk about server-side programming. First, let's establish context. In the web space, we have a client that consumes the content and a server which serves up that content to the client. The client makes a request and the server provides a response. When it comes to web programming, it helps to consider who's doing the work that is delineated in the program. Or in other words, where is that code being executed? Take our simple news page. Perhaps it has some JavaScript that adds functionality to the page, like a collapsible list. All of that content for that page and the JavaScript that drives that list were delivered to the client as part of the initial request. The work performed by that script happens locally, meaning the code is executed by the client or the browser. Client-side programming has made for a richer web experience. However, there are times that a client-side script can't get the job done. For example, more than ever, the news is constantly changing. It would be impractical to continually rewrite and redeploy a news-based web page. Our news page needs to be dynamic and data-driven. This is a job better suited for server-side programming because we may not want the client to have direct access to certain resources like our database or the proprietary code in our program. When a client requests a page which includes server-side programming, the server executes the code before sending the response to that request. Server-side programming can be written in many different languages, but the work is all the same. Perhaps in our dynamic news page scenario, our server-side program checks a database to see if the requester is a paying subscriber, and if so, adds premium content to the page, which it gets from a different database. All of that work happens on the server before the page is ever sent back to the client. Each approach has its pros and cons. Client-side scripting adds interactivity and takes workload off the servers, yet there are limitations to what it can do. Server-side scripting can't provide interactivity, places a workload on the server, and requires additional requests back to the server if new content is required. Still, there is much work that can only be performed on the server side of the equation. The internet would not be the modern web that we know without server-side programming. The same is true of client-side programming. In fact, the most dynamic pages employ both technologies, using a blend of local JavaScript and server-side code to deliver both interactivity and depth of content. I've prepared two photo gallery pages for us to consider, one static, one dynamic. The one on the left is the static page, which contains a figure element. For each image I want to display, these figure elements were handwritten, and that could be problematic if I were trying to put a lot of them in here, or I wanted to change those on a regular basis. At the bottom of this static page is some client-side code, one that handles navigation and one that handles the current date, both of which might seem familiar to some of you. The static page pulls up, and let's take a look at that. I'm going to do a hard reload on this so we can see everything come down. And there is our static page with 3 images in it, and you can see that the gallery HTML file was the initiator, and it brought down CSS and the JPEGs and other assets, one of which was our code, for example, our current date. And if I wanted to look at this in sources, I could see all of the code that's part of my, let me go to scripts, there it is. I can see the code, and it's there for everybody to take a look at and to borrow and to use. And so that's one of the issues with client-side scripting is the scripts are being delivered to the client. Let's take a look at our dynamic PHP page now. If I render that, we'll go back to brackets and look at what's happening. Inside the gallery div is some PHP code which will be executed on the server, and it's going to take a look at the dynamic directory in the image directory and look for all JPEG files. This glob function will put that into an array, We're going to loop through the array and echo out a figure element for each image that we find in that directory. So we'll go back to Chrome and load that page, and we can see that now we have many pages coming down. These are images I've taken this summer in Utah, where I live. I love the mountains and love where I live. And these were all written dynamically. If we go to take a look at the what came down, there were many more images. But in our gallery PHP file, if I look at the source, we don't see the PHP code as part of what was delivered to the client. That is retained on the server side and replaced with the output. And so our code is safe, and that's a good thing because we may have database credentials as part of that code. We might have proprietary code that we don't want people looking at, and that's one of the advantages of server-side code. Both server-side and client-side have their place, and the trick is to use the right tool for the job, which is why we need to be familiar with what's available both on the client and on the server. And as I said before, some of the best sites use and employ both technologies hand in hand through technologies like Ajax, where they're having server-side code that's being called by client-side functionality to create very dynamic pages. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the best.